Hey, so it's a couple of hours later, and this is a continuation of the first video on Excel that I did that's about identifying information from two different sources that doesn't match up and creating a unique ID that lets you match up data sets that maybe weren't originally meant to go together, but which could be useful if you could look at them together. So in that video where we left off was where uh, I had gotten to this point where a lot of the team names, there's 351 rows in this set. So a number of the names match, but then you'll see there's like whole other sets that don't. And so the next step was kind of thinking about, okay, is there a pattern to this? What's the best way to do this? My initial reaction, just in skimming through, I think I'd scroll to the bottom, and then also was just looking at the top set and was thinking, oh, if there's not that many, maybe I would just do that manually. After scrolling through this a little bit more, it seems like there's quite a few that well, striking out, I'll just say, in terms of match to the second data set. So I wanted to just look at this a little bit more closely and show some thinking around what might be happening there. So one of the things that we had talked about in the previous video is that there's kind of it's three sets really. So it's three different surveys, but one is using one source and the other two are using the same but different source as the first one, which is how these names kind of got out of alignment. In terms of where to make the change, because I was trying to think ahead to, what's the actual activity. I'll try to open up a screen here. So this is where we had gotten to, the next steps that we wanted to do. So we generated a common ID and we're basically in the check stage right now. So I'm gonna get rid of all of this. So one of the things that is coming up is, which set is larger. So if I'm going to make individual corrections anywhere, I'm probably not going to choose the larger data set. So in terms of what we're working with, one of the records I think has about, or one of the surveys has about 2,600 responses, and then the other one, I'll call these two. These other two maybe together have about 1,000 or so, um, which you know it's kind of a lot in either sense. If we split this out a little bit further, in this instance, there's probably I'm gonna say 1 to 10 responses per business unit. And in the other, there's probably somewhere between 7 to 10 per business unit. So just in thinking about, um, should be a slash, thinking about which is going to require you to do a little bit more management. That's one thing that I'll think about when starting into a project like this. The other thing is just, what's the actual activity? Because I like to think about, what's a way that we could make this replicable? And often, especially when we're just trying to like get things done, I'll just battle exit, which was kind of my instinct in that last one of like, I'm just gonna do them individually. But really, what we were seeing when we get all of the signals, I'll just do an example here. So a squiggle is going to mean a text, and then an X is going to be that we got nothing, right? So in some instances, we got a couple of X's in a row and then a couple of actual responses. The reason it's not matching up is because of the school name, right? So the actual name of the business unit in this instance is different. So let's say we're going from the external survey. So this column is full of the business unit name that's in the external survey, and we use that to generate a key. The question that we're wondering is, if changed, we basically want to swap out for some of the items, um, which ID is being used. So in instances like this, we actually want to, the action item is that we want to be able to replace the external survey business unit name with the internal. However, we don't want to actually override it, right? Because then if we ever need to do this again, let's assume that whatever the source is for this external one, let's assume that it is consistent in its own context, right? Like it always produces names that look like whatever it is. I think one of the examples was BOS English for the external. And then on the internal side, what's a complementary color to orange? On the internal side, we got BOS dash English high school. And so neither of these, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that for our purposes, it's not helpful. So to just directly overwrite the external business unit would mean that we would have trouble linking this back to other data from that same source, or that if we needed to do it again later, we wouldn't actually have like an answer key. So um, in thinking about, what's like one extra step that we could take that will actually make this sustainable if we needed to replicate this again, we're going to do kind of like a second layer of mapping where we want to understand, cool, so like this is your external name, this is your internal name. In instances uh, where we got the blue squid, and I'm going to change this color so that it's a little bit easier so I can use a color code instead of a squiggle VX code. Right. So in instances where we got text, I'm going to put just T instead. In instances where we got text here, that means that the external and the internal name are the same, right? Our output for in this ID check was what the exercise was that we were doing. Our output in those instances was also good, right? So these are the same here. When we got the squiggle result, or I'm sorry, the cancel, the X result, what our challenge is that effectively, and it's not that this is wrong necessarily, but it's that these are different. So because these are different, there wasn't a match. When we independently generated those IDs using this name, we got two different results, and that's what canceled out on us. So what we want to look at is seeing, is there a way that we can kind of make a surrogate column to swap out? If one condition is true, then print something else. And so this is going to invite us to use an if statement. I'll put up at purple what our next objective is. So we're going to want to do basically if error, and this is an actual function in Excel, if error, uh, basically we'll do another, because you could use a VLOOKUP, but I'll say we'll do another sort of index match. And we're going to take it from, we're going to generate an ID that's using the other name. So it's just kind of a way of dancing around the fact that we basically want to switch cases. If it's working, great. If it's not working, change. And so we'll try this out, or we might even see that there's a way to just do that for everybody and then just use one normed name. That's another way that we can approach this kind of problem. So there'll be another follow up. I'm going to try to break these down into smaller chunks so that it's not just like one big 60-minute block. But this is what we'll be doing in the next step.